Hello, hi. So I am back to talk about, get my words together, episode 9 of Lovecraft Country. This episode was called Rewind 1921. So we all knew what that meant. We've been leading up to something connected to Tulsa, but of course we saw last week that they realized that the Book of Names was burned up in a fire in Tulsa. Now, after watching the episode, I want to think that maybe it wasn't burnt up. However, also after watching tonight's episode, I realized that they had to do what they did. That had to happen in order for us to get to where we are today. So let's get into this episode. So first of all, one word describes this episode: emotion. There was so much emotion, and doesn't mean that there's not emotion in other episodes, but for this episode it was just filled with emotion, and also generational trauma. And we got to see the root of Montrose's abusive treatment of Tick. Does that excuse it? No. But what that does do is explain it. And it was very emotional watching Tick as he cycled through these very, very strong feelings about Montrose, his dad. So he went from, I hate you, I never want to see you again, to I pity you and I feel really bad for what you experienced, to you're my dad, you're my dad. And you know, when they start handing out awards, I don't know if the Academy is going to do it, because we all know how that goes, especially, you know, with just Black projects in general, but then also with horror, sci-fi, fantasy. Those have historically been genres that you don't typically see at the Academy Awards for various reasons that deal with kind of how, I guess, polite society deems those particular genres, and you don't typically see them show up in the awards, which is, you know, if they do show up, it's always like a big deal, because it's like, oh my god, a horror or a sci-fi show got an award. And I think there was one recently, and I'm completely drawing a blank, but nonetheless, when it's time to give out awards, if the academies don't get it right, at minimum, I need to see at the NAACP awards, I need to see, I'm about to use their character names because I'm drawing a blank on everybody's real name, but I need to see Hippolyta, I need to see Miss Letty, and I need to see, of course, Montrose and Atticus. I need all of them to get all the awards for acting. Now, so many other things could get awards for just the cinematography. We're gonna talk about that in a second. The costuming, the directing, the storytelling. Like, this show needs to win so many things because it has so much good stuff. But the acting, like the emotion, the acting. But nonetheless, sidebar. And so that was kind of the note I wrote. Generational trauma. That was the big thing in this episode, that really we got that backstory of the trauma. And also, you know, we see that for the most part, George and Montrose's father was an abusive person, abusive parent. He abused his kids. However, we definitely see what we did not see when George and Montrose were kind of having their, you know, like, you didn't protect me. You know, George was kind of apologizing, or I think episode 2, like, I didn't protect you. And he said it was because Montrose was smaller. But we're getting more of the truth, is that Montrose, you know, he exhibited signs of what his father deemed as softness. And we know now that you know, he was learning himself and kind of grappling with his sexuality in 1920s America. So just in general, that's a rough time to be someone who is homosexual or sexually fluid or anything that is outside of the binary, what society expected at that time, at this time, whatever. But then definitely more so, just because the intolerance was so much higher. And seeing him, and we got to also meet his first love, who was killed by the white mobs who came and killed and destroyed Tulsa. And then we got that answer, that big story that Montrose would tell about how him, George, and I don't know why I keep forgetting her name, him, George, and Tick's mom, how they, made it out of not being killed or attacked by the white mob. And, the stranger that showed up with a bat like Jackie Robinson and, kicked ass, didn't take names. And we realized that that was Tick. And that's when it starts to kind of come together that them going back to 1921 needed to happen in order for them to be able to go back in 1921. And so even seeing Letty, when Letty was made invulnerable last episode, and at first thought, it's like that seemed selfish. I'm sure to some people that might have seemed selfish, but my thought watching it was she did that for her child, so that her child can be protected because of all the tomfoolery that could happen to them in Jim Crow South. And so she wanted to make sure that the baby was okay. And being an invulnerable mother to a growing baby is one really solid way to make sure that happens. But then we see she needed to be invulnerable because she had to go into the house where Tick's mom's family died, perished in a fire, and to get the Book of Names. And so that leads me back to, when they say that the Book of Names burned in a fire, I wonder if it actually did. Like maybe it was always there. It could have been in the rubble. It could have gotten buried after, everything got burnt down and things got pushed to the ground. Whatever it is, like it might have survived, just because when they were in the fire, I don't know that Letty's invulnerability extends to things that she's holding. So she was holding the book, and the book did not catch on fire like everyone else did. And just watching, Atticus's great grandmother burn, like, and then seeing them pray together, like, it was just so much. It was so emotional. And then seeing her walk through the attack and them dropping the bombs, because that, if you have not watched Watchmen, the Tulsa massacre, because it was not a riot, the Tulsa massacre was horrific and terrible. And it wasn't just, a group of men, a group of angry white men showing up and torching the place. Like, this was a coordinated attack on this wealthy Black community. And just a sidebar, it's very funny. I was actually talking the other day to someone about this, to my brother. I was talking to him, and, we were kind of having that whole conversation about, like, why don't Black people just come together and create our own? And, we need to have our own wealth. And it's like, and when I said to him, when he said that, it was like, yeah, we've done that a lot of times. It's not like this is a one-off where now we're in a place. No, at that time, because of segregation and the different racist laws that made it so that Black people could not exist in white society, Black people had to create their own in order to be able to live. So they had to create their own communities and their own structures, and they did so, and many of them were prosperous. Tulsa is one. Tulsa is not the only. There were many communities like that, way more than just one or two, because of the fact that they just had to exist. And we see in watching what happened in tonight's episode how it was burned to the ground, literally, not just by an angry mob, because what they'll tell you in stories is that, well, it was just an angry mob and they just killed a lot of people. But that's not what it was. It was a coordinated attack where they treated this town like it was, you know, something to be destroyed, and their goal was to burn it to the ground. And yes, while they're, you know, they used what happened they used what happened with the guy on the elevator. That wasn't even a thing. They used that as an excuse to do what they wanted to do anyway. It wasn't that they were so angry. You don't go and get planes with bombs because you're so angry that that's an injustice. That takes planning and preparation, and they have the resources and they use them to obliterate this town. So when people are quick to say how, you know, our ancestors, there's always this, and I'm completely going to sidebar, but there's this conversation that I see happening online where it's like, you know, our ancestors just took it and just accepted the status quo and just were oppressed, and that's not true. And we get to see that story, we get to see the insidious nature of white supremacy, and we get to see the additional generational trauma. Like, the generational trauma definitely exists within families, for sure. You know, you as parents, you often, though you parent with what you have, you show up with what you have to offer your child, and if you were not given much, then you sometimes don't have much to give. But also the generational trauma that Black people have experienced in this country, like the layers. It's just so much. Like I said, the emotion. You know, I feel like I'm prattling on a bit, but it was just this episode. You know, I'm sure there were some historical Easter eggs. The whole episode was a historical Easter egg, and it was a glimpse in time into a time where, you know, they're like seeing them step into 1921 and seeing them in this town that was so prosperous and Black and beautiful and just fantastic was just, again, emotion. And then to see them have to let the events play as they were, because you can't disrupt history, because if you disrupt history, then what is in the present may no longer exist. That is for those of you who this may be your first time kind of encountering the idea of time travel in fictional work, that is a big thing, a big part of it. Whenever someone travels back in time, you don't want to change something because it will likely have ripple effects into the future. It's kind of the whole butterfly effect. It's like you step on, you know, like you break a tree in 1901, and that tree may not grow to become the tree that shades the land, that, you know, like that was a very weird analogy, and I wanted to stop before it went left, but that is kind of a part of time travel and just the tropes that exist in time travel. And there are some movies that take it to like the nth level, where it's like you step on a blade of grass and that changes everything. Like they take the butterfly effect. And for those who aren't familiar with the butterfly effect, essentially it means that, you know, when a butterfly flaps his wings, that may seem like a small, insignificant thing, but that wind affects the winds of the world, which affects time, which affects what we have, you know, might cause a storm. If you have a bunch of butterflies like that, that's the idea. That's what it ultimately means in a very loosely explained way, because I did not Google that. So they had to watch these horrific things happen, which again, emotion. But one thing that I noted, one thing that I wrote in my notes was a question because Hippolyta came up, which, yay! I was like, yes, I didn't think that Hippolyta would completely go away, but also we realized Hippolyta got to she became a part of the multiverse, which means she can move back and forth through time with ease. And so when Hippolyta came back and she said, I've been in Earth 504, I've lived 200 years there. And my thing was, once everything happened, did Hippolyta know that's what would happen? Did Hippolyta know I have to come back at this time because I need to make sure that the Book of Names actually makes it out of Tulsa in this timeline, in the timeline that they are currently on with Tick and Letty? You know, she has to know that they have a son in the future because she's seen these things. And I can't imagine that when she was living in her infinite nature, in her infinite I am, that she was, that she didn't check on her loved ones. Because, you know, she definitely treats Tick like a son. And you can see that. And she definitely, you know, I'm sure wanted to make sure that Diana was okay. And she wanted to see. So I can't imagine she didn't check on them in the various timelines and knew that she had to return at this time. So that means that she must have known that Diana was going to get expelled. Like, imagine the weight of that responsibility and knowing what has to happen. And I would love to see if they bring that up in the season finale, which is next week, which is so sad. I've been Googling and checking to see if they're gonna have a season 2. I saw something where they said this was like a limited series. Excuse me, it's not the Rona. But I think that, kidding. I wanna know if there's gonna be another season, because goodness gracious, we have so much more to explore. And I would love to just see these characters again in this universe and kind of see how this goes and see how, you know, once we get past Jim Crow South and civil rights movement, what it looks like for maybe the 80s or the 70s even. But I digress. I'm just kind of rambling. I'm very excited to see what's going to happen in the season finale, but sad that it's going to be off. What did you think? What were your thoughts after tonight's episode? Did you learn something that you weren't aware of about everything that happened with Tulsa? Did you have some questions? Do you think that Hippolyta knew what was going to happen and knew she had to show up at that time particularly versus maybe before stopping Dee from being hexed and spelled? Did she know that? What do you think? What are your thoughts? Let's talk about it in the comments. The emotion is overwhelming. I am off now to look at Twitter and see what is happening on Twitter and my different Facebook groups where they're talking about it. And I look forward to listening to the podcast, the official podcast for the show. Again, the link is down below, so you should check it out. Also, subscribe. Next week is the season finale, so I'm definitely going to be back to talk about the finale and the feels and the emotions and the thoughts. So subscribe so you can be notified when I post my next review of Lovecraft Country, as well as other things that I post, because I talk about some other stuff on the channel. So again, tonight, emotion. I'm definitely looking forward to next week. I'm looking forward to your thoughts in the comments, and I'm looking forward to the next time that we can talk again. Bye.